Right, so our next speaker is Dr. Melinda Dooley. She holds a PhD in language teaching from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. She's currently Sarah Hunter Professor in the Department of Language, Literature and Social Science teaching, same university. And she's been an honorary lecturer at the Institute of Education at University College London in Great Britain, and a visiting professor at several centres in the United States and Europe. Her research focuses on language teaching and learning, particularly on project-based learning and technology-mediated learning methodologies. And she's also an expert in teaching training, particularly in the areas of intercultural communication and 21st century skills. She's also the founder of Moderadora Journal of Teaching and Learning Language and Literature, and co-editor the book series Tele-Collaboration in Education, published by P.R. Lang, and a member of the editorial team of the Journal Language and Intercultural Communication. Our presentation today, hopefully, is about that. Yeah, it's focused on that. Bringing backward technology into primary education language teaching. So whenever you want, the floor is yours. No.
Now? Yes? You hear me? I have a quiet voice. I speak softly, but I carry a big stick. So, yeah. It's a Southern thing. Okay? It's always interesting to hear people describe me because I'm like, who are they talking about? No? Okay, some of those things, I'm no longer editor of that journal. I handed it over, for example. I started it, but then after 10 years, I said I've had enough. Now I'm no longer editor, but I'm very proud of it. So thank you for mentioning it. And I don't like the word expert either. So I'll do my best to live up to this wonderful introduction. I'm not sure that I'm up for it, but I'll do my best. And I would also like to thank the organizers, and they're not here anymore, but the young ladies that have been so insistent on following up with me on emails, because I've been notoriously late in answering emails, and I do apologize for that, and I thank you again for all your patience. So, and I'd also like to thank my colleague, Chiara, because she set the groundwork for so much of what I'm going to talk about here in so much detail, and the methodological approaches that I'll be glossing over, she has thankfully covered in much detail. So I think it's going to kind of mesh into what I hope to talk about. So I do want to point out before I go that there is consent obtained for the use of all these images. They do come from projects that I've been working with, I've been collaborating on, and all images are with consent to use. So this is hopefully what we'll do today. I did set my alarm. No, I didn't start it yet. Okay, it started now. A quick overview of language teaching approaches and predictions of the technology impact on language teaching approaches. And I think that fits in very, very well with what we just saw, because I'm not going to go into as much detail, but the references are very much along those lines. Then I'm going to provide two examples of what I consider to be innovative technology, vanguard technology. Now, who knows, in 5 years, 10 years, it will probably be old school. Some of the pedagogical implications of using these tools, a bit of reflection about where we are now, and maybe how we can look at the integration, digital teaching, the digitalization that was mentioned in the introduction here this morning. How do we position ourselves as teachers or future teachers? Looking at these young faces, I have a feeling that most of you are future teachers and maybe not teachers yet. I don't know. It's my guess. I don't want to. I may be completely out of my my range in making these predictions, and then open for questions and answers if you have any, okay? Or I'm also open up to comments or insults even, if that be the case. So let's think about where we're coming from. If you're old like me, You may recall some of these technologies. If you're not old like me, you may even be asking, what is that? Okay, this was not me, all right? Mind you. The next picture, yes, I did use. This one I did not use, okay? This is a little bit older even than myself. But where are we coming from, right? First of all, if you're in education, you're used to hearing vox populi. You're used to hearing all of these proclamations about education, or it's emerging out of a phoenix, and it's what's going to save the world, or it is the demise of the world. There's these extremes, and then when technology comes into it, it's also these extremes. Oh, technology! Oh, we're not going to have school anymore. We're dumbing down the population, or it's going to save the world. It's going to save education. So, these predictions, I found some headlines. They've been around forever, okay? So we need to take them all with a grain of salt. That doesn't mean we dismiss completely what's happening with digitalization, but there's always been technology, and there's always been teachers who've tried to bring these into teaching, and there's always been some popular myths or whatever, legends that go along with it. I've always said that if you're in education, we're like the poor cousins of science. People have always gone to the doctor since they were born. They've gone to a doctor all their lives, but they don't dare say, or they didn't used to, now they do with internet, but they don't usually tell you, try to make predictions about how you should cure yourselves, right? But because the entire world has gone to school, at least until age 16, everyone considers themselves an expert in education. This may ring a bell or not, but everyone has an opinion on education. It's not always grounded in research. It's something we have to get used to. So it's something as well, when it comes to technology, we're going to hear a lot of things about what's going on. And this goes to the topic of the title of my presentation, which is predictions. We're going to hear a lot of predictions, and predictions are just that, predictions, right? And I'm going to make some predictions as well, and they may or may not come true. But as the presentation before showed, research is key to making good predictions and to getting ready for that, okay? So, having said that, I would also say that language teachers have always been in the vanguard on uptake of technology in the classroom, and I think it's for obvious reasons, and I think also that was touched on in this first presentation. Technology helps us communicate, and so it's got an intrinsic point within our classroom if it's done correctly, which I also thank the last presentation for pointing that out so well. Davies, who unfortunately is no longer with us and therefore cannot update his 3 phases of technology, computer-assisted language learning, he called 1970s to 1980s the dumb call. So mostly limited to sound and video. And yes, I have actually used this technology you see here. I do recall that one. Then we moved into multimedia, then web call, and maybe, since Davies is not here, I'm going to be so bold as to say maybe we're moving into the phase of collaborative smart call, where machines and humans are adapting to each other, because now we have, with AI, this language learning, we have the AI learning capacity. So the automated capacity of the technology itself. So perhaps we're now in what we might call a smart call. And as has already been pointed out, the reason for us being where we are is because for the last 50 or so years, there's been a push for the communicative approach. I'm not going to go over all of this. This has already been highlighted in the first presentation. But all of these factors of communicative approach, technology can really support that these aspects of communicative language teaching are actually brought into practice, that they're brought into the classroom. As has been pointed out in the first presentation, if done correctly, right? Communicative language teaching has had a lot of spin-offs. I don't know if I would use that. Maybe I shouldn't use the word spin-off because that might be seen as derogatory. But there have been a lot of alternative focuses, content language integrated learning, project-based language learning, which we just saw here, virtual exchange, also known as telecollaboration. Combinations of these, I've worked with teachers who have done project-based collaborative CLIL, but with virtual exchange. So, and we're going to see an example today. So we also have, with digitalization, gamification coming in, but sort of a nexus to all of this, the backbone to all of this is also the integration of technology to make it possible. So, how is this being translated and transferred into classrooms? So here I'm going to provide two examples. One is an example of virtual reality in primary education, and another one is an example of AI-enhanced virtual exchange. Sorry. Okay. So the first one is a collaboration between myself and Dr. Randall Sadler, who's at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, an MA, now PhD student, and a very, very dedicated, lovely teacher named Monica Lopez, who's also an associate professor at our faculty. And we also had teacher trainees. So it was a bit, I think, similar to the setup that Chiara was describing. We made sure that we had young teachers also getting experience in doing these things. So we had each year a different teacher trainee who we provided a bit of money for them to also participate in this VR. And of course, the students themselves were participants and collaborating with us and were absolutely fantastic. So this was for 4th and 5th graders. Because we did it over a 3-year period, it varied. So we started with 5th, they moved up to 6th, then we went back to 5th. We were supposed to do it again a 4th year this year, but unfortunately Monica had to take a sick leave, and we haven't been able to do this 4th year. But the idea was to have over a 2-year period, the same students. We did manage that. That's why I say it's approximate 25 students, because again, because it was over several years and that varied. They were native speakers of Catalan and Spanish. Their English level was A2, maybe some B1 there, pushing it, not quite, but some students with very good levels. As I said, we had 2 teachers, researchers in place, and the student interns. And then we had 2 teachers who were inside the virtual world. All right? I'll show you pictures in a minute. Okay. So how did we do this? We took the large group, divided them in half, and for one week, so each block that we were looking at, that I'll explain the blocks in a minute, one group went off with another teacher and did what you might call, what some people call stations, corners. So these were in-class activities that the teacher designed, Monica designed with us, to help complement what the students in VR were doing. And then the VR session, because they were limited to 20-minute sessions in the VR headsets, that half group we split again, and that's why we say it's a 4th group. And half of that half group were in the VR settings with the headsets, and another group was doing a focus group discussion. Here you can see one of the student interns conducting this focus group discussion to try to elicit their reflection about what they were learning in these in the VR sessions. Who's Who came up, and that was one of the corners. I'll explain how it's related, but they also, in the corners, they were playing Who's Who. So seems to be a popular game for English classrooms. So we used a platform called Immerse. These have different environments that you can choose to take your students into, and it's one teacher inside, okay? But the teacher who's controlling it is controlling it from a laptop. That's important to understand. The teacher's not got a headset on. Teachers controlling it from a laptop. That was me. I was doing that. And then the students we had someone with a headset, which was Dr. Sadler or the intern from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, using a headset, acting as inside the VR world avatar, okay? How many of you have done VR? Yeah? Okay, so you might be having some difficulties understanding what I'm saying. I'll give you a little video so you can see in a minute what it looked like. We had here some examples of the locations. As we said, it was done over 3 years, so it's not just these locations. But, for example, we had a deserted island. This was where they got to learn about the digital spaces. This is their first time in. They're having to learn to control the handsets, how to do things. So this was mostly based on just becoming familiar with the VR environment. Then we had an art studio where they had to describe pictures. This is not shown here. Well, it's shown here, but the pictures themselves are in a different area of that. And that's where the who's who, learning to describe, physical descriptions, that was going together. They had a garage where they talked about sports and hobbies, and then they had a home where they were describing routines. You can see a little bit here in scene one, for example, I've outlined it more. Learning gestures, learning things that they could do, like fist bumps. With your avatars, you can do fist bumps, you can do high fives, and all kinds of fun things. Thumbs up, thumbs down. In the art gallery as well, like I said, physical descriptions. The garage, we had some boxes. There were all kinds of things they could go find. They had to find things, bring them to the avatar teacher, and say what it was, and then decide whether it would go in the box for sports, in the box for hobbies, which was a little bit confusing and not well designed, that activity, I have to say, because sports can be hobbies, but we were thinking painting would go there, whatever. Or if it was just household goods. And then in scene 4, they were having to talk about using frequency adverbs. They had to find something in the home. There were a lot of things they could find, like a toothbrush. They had to bring it and say, I use this toothbrush every day or whatever. So they had to take turns finding things according to a number that they rolled on the dice, okay? So if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to this short video. You'll see what they're doing inside, but in the corner, you'll see what it looks like on the outside, all right? Hopefully. It's not showing. So this is students, what they're doing, what it looks like on the outside. And here you have them on the inside. It could get really messy sometimes, right? At one point, they started throwing garbage bags at me. Okay? Yeah, as you can see. So all kinds of things go on. It's a little bit of chaos, but it's fun chaos, right? So from that project, we had a lot of data, and we still have a lot of data, and we're just scratching the iceberg on this one. We have pre, post, and mid vocabulary tests. This is from last year. One student was absent, so we only have 25 on that one. We had the focus group interviews. We had written self-reflections. After the closing session, they wrote out some self-reflections about what they had learned, what they'd enjoyed most. We also had lots of recordings. We had recordings, as you can see, of what they were doing. Although by the third year, we decided not to record that anymore because it's really not that interesting after the first year. I mean, you can't see what's going on. You just see people doing this. So we said, this is not really relevant anymore. We did have video recordings from the inside. So you can record with the headsets, but you can also record from the screen of the teacher. So we have the 2 recordings from the screen and from one of the headsets, and of course the audio reflections and the audio recordings of the groups doing the stations also when they're playing What's Up and other things, right? So some of the preliminary results is that we see an overall improvement in post-test results. There's definitely improvement in recognition of key vocabulary that we had already decided they would be working on before they started the sessions. With the teacher and the design of the material, she knew what she wanted them to learn, and so we did pre and post-test results, and we're definitely seeing improvement in that. Recognition and use of target lexicon inside the VR, as well as in the stations, as well as in the corners, but also inside the inside of the VR environments. Increased recognition of low-frequency words like bald and frisbee and crown, because these were things they had to use that they wouldn't normally have to use in other situations. Evidence of incidental learning that we had not planned on them learning, but the set phrases like behave, because the teacher kept saying, you must behave, the American teacher, you must behave. And so after the first session, like, Monica, what does it mean, behave? And she's like, en catalán, portarte bien, portarse bien. And so they learned words such as behave. In fact, this was when the students were asked, what would you recommend for students coming up? Listen to Melinda and Randall and behave. So that was quite motivating to learn that they actually learned that. Things like fist bumps, high five, not spelled correctly, but they didn't mention that. Evidence of gains in digital competence, inevitably, and evidence of learner motivation. They all said, I think much like what you pointed out here, that they would definitely prefer to repeat these kind of lessons than going back to the more traditional teacher-centered book lessons. So, before I start here, this was a lot of the data, but because of the name of this session and because of this is based on discourse, what I decided to focus on was just to present you, much like we just saw, examples of language use going on. Here we're going to see, this is from the last year, they're in a shopping center and they've been given objects to find, they're divided into teams, they have to find objects according to the target, whatever they have. For example, team 1 had to go camping, and team 2 had to decide what they would find, some objects to celebrate the younger brother's birthday, and then they would have to put them in the baskets and bring them back to the teacher avatar. And here we go. I don't know if you can actually hear it.
Oh, yes, yes.
Do you hear it?
Okay.
Okay.
Natalie, let's go. I have you. The rest of me. No, it's Natalie. Okay. Okay, Natalie. Martín. I have the target. Martín. What? Look. Oh. No. I want to do a math. Okay, drop. Hostia. Yes. Despacito. Natalie, aquí está. No, but Ivan is. Okay. Okay, well, it's food. Yes. There is no food. I'm not here. You answer for Natalie. Okay. ¿Qué? Repeat, please. Natalie, where are you? Stop, Eric. Stop speak. I'm here, Natalie. This is food. We have to find where? Object. This is food. Okay. Thanks, Natalie. Skate brother's birthday. Where? Oh, Martí. Where do you find this? We have to find objects to go camping. Okay. A mobile. We have to. A ball. A ball, Natalie. This? Oh, thanks.
Okay. I'm going to just show this again. This is, unfortunately, I couldn't find the video that matched this from the headset itself because it's much more interesting. Here we had the teacher, this Crystal, she wasn't that experienced with doing it from the teacher's side, and so she was having some trouble. She should have closed the student manager screen in order to film all of this. There are times when she doesn't move the avatar so that it's filming. So unfortunately, it's not as filmed as well as it could be, but you can see the amount of language use that's going on in just this few seconds. And we have loads and loads of data. It's just amazing how much they force themselves to use the target language. And if someone would use Spanish or Catalan, the others would not respond to them in that language. They would respond back to them in English, or even reprimand them and say, no, in English here, in English. So that's that first project. And now I'm going to move on to the second one because I'm running out of time. This is an AI-enhanced VE, and it's a collaboration between myself again, a school teacher in Catalonia, just outside of Barcelona, Sant Jordi School, and then a teacher from Nigeria, from Abuja, Nigeria, and an English language instructor who's also a PhD student, originally from Nigeria. So these two, Maria and Ese Manuel, decided to work together and create a telecollaborative project because they were both interested in technologies. Because I knew they were both interested in technology, I said, well, why don't you consider doing a virtual exchange and find a teacher in Nigeria? And so from just maybe a bit too much coffee at a break one time, something emerged. It was very from the ground up, but something emerged that was an absolutely fascinating project. There were 52 students in Barcelona, huge group of students, fourth graders, 9 to 10, A1, maybe A2 in some of the cases. It was not real high level. And there were only 7 students in Abuja, Nigeria. And this was a foundation that the teacher has started that you just saw, Mowo, she goes by Mowo, had just started. She was the founder of it, and it takes in orphans. So it was a very special school with limited resources. They're native speakers of English plus the local levels. So we had 2 teachers and researchers in the classrooms, and then we had myself. I was helping Maria, also involved in the design, and we had Ese Manuel designing the AI platform, okay? So here you have us online discussing, and as it was already pointed out, the design of the tasks for virtual exchange are key. And if they don't work, and if the scaffolding materials are not ready and are not prepared, and the timing of what you're going to be doing is not carefully considered, it's probably not going to work. There'll be still things that go wrong, but at least you can handle it so much better. So we spent, I think, 3 months designing and planning. The materials, the AI platform was a special language platform, special for child. It was child-friendly. We also, after piloting it, discovered that we needed to tell it could only speak English because students discovered that it would respond to them in Spanish and Catalan. So we had to give it instructions for it to say, no, sorry, I only speak English. I only use English. Please use English. Of course, we presented it to the schools, presented it to the parents, got their consent. We also got consent from the students, and then we introduced the students into the project. But we didn't tell them exactly who they would be working with. We used, I'm sure some of you have already heard of this, what's called the mystery classroom. Many virtual exchanges start out this way, where you have to ask yes/no questions to your partner, so that then you try to guess where they're sitting, where they're located. Usually this is done in one session if you got higher level students, but Maria said, there's no way my students at A1 can do this on their own in one session. So we took 3 weeks to do this classroom, mystery classroom, but it was really, really rich data and rich communication because the students worked in small groups to come up with the questions that they would answer. And then they had to, the questions they would ask, and they were having to ask smart questions. That was really hard for them because they couldn't figure out how to ask a smart question that would eliminate options. So it took almost 2 weeks to get them to have, as groups, 10 questions. Then they had their first video conference where they asked those questions and they could only answer yes or no. Then they had another week to get to debate where they thought these schools were from. And then they had another video conference where they offered their guesses, right? And you have to think, we're talking 7 students talking to 52, okay? That was hard to manage. I can explain how that was done later. But I have to say, they managed to guess the place, not only the country, but one group actually figured out they were in Abuja. Amazing, not sure how. They said that they just went like this. They knew that it was going to be Nigeria or Ethiopia, okay, because they were close. There were similarities in the two countries. So they just said, put a finger on the atlas and said it's Abuja, and that was where it was from. And when they said, "Are you from Abuja, Nigeria?" I should have brought this clip in because it's much like the clip she just showed. 52 students erupting in, "Yay!" It's an amazing, amazing film. So then they got into what was actually the task, which was doing research locally about water conservation, because these 2 teachers had decided to work on the Sustainable Development Goal 6. They started with a comparison of guessing, where do you think these pictures are from? And they were showing pictures of drought and showing pictures of just very desolate areas. And of course, all the students in Nigeria, the students in Catalonia, guessed that it was somewhere in Africa when they were actually pictures from Catalonia, just a few kilometers away from the school itself, because the pictures were taken during the drought that we suffered just less in this past year. And so that was their first glimpse into the reality of these problems and how these things are global and they're not stereotypical problems. And they did some research on what are some things you could do to help with the sustainability of water, conserve water. Then they made comparison about how you get access. You can see one of the PowerPoints here. Obviously, very different access, and it drove it home to the students in Catalonia. The students we're working with, they have to go to a well. We open a tap, they go to a well. So the intercultural awareness there was also quite amazing. We did have also teacher exchange. The teachers would go in and talk with the different classes, and then in the end, we found money to bring the Nigerian student to Catalonia, and there was a whole week of festivities designed around her visit to Catalonia. Then they started in on doing a campaign, an advocacy, campaign design. They had to create different output that would teach others about the importance of sustaining water. This, again, was AI supported, and I'm going to give you some examples, hopefully if I have time, of them working with AI, with this special platform to come up with ideas, to help them once they had ideas, what they wanted to do. So I'll show you some output in a minute. They were free to decide how they wanted to do it, okay? And this also meant contact with the community. Here you can see some pictures of the Nigerian students going out and interviewing. The same was in Catalonia, but I'm trying to provide varied pictures here, but we've got so many pictures, it's hard to choose which one. And then we had a finale where the Nigerian students, they're actually on screen behind this group. They presented to the rest of the school. They presented to parents. Local news station came and was interviewing the students and put it on TV. And so this was all really very emotional for them. I actually had parents come up to me with tears in their eyes. It was really emotional. They were like, I never expected this to happen. We had a student who was special needs. He was autistic. And then during the video conference, when they were guessing the countries, the student who had never participated in anything had a special monitor with him all the time at school. When the teacher from Catalonia said, who would like to ask the first question, this little boy, he was the first one to raise his hand. And everyone was like, looked at him, and he stood up and went and asked the question. And the monitor who worked with this little boy had to leave the room. She was in tears. She said, I can't believe that this happened. So it was really very emotional to see how connected the students were with all of this project. And it also comes out in their feedback. So, going on, here's some examples of the output. These were all AI supported except for the parent pledges at the end. I put that in because I think it's nice. So they created posters, they created graphic novels, comics. Some of them did videos. Some of them did plays. They did a shared anthem. They created with AI an anthem about saving water, and they sang it, and it's on the local TV and all this stuff. And they also had a logo, which unfortunately, I have a water bottle. We handed out water bottles at the end with this logo on it. So they created all of this with AI. With the logo, they sent out a survey and sent it to teachers, and then asked the teachers in Catalonia to share it with others and to have people vote. And in the end, they had over 250 votes from around the world. And we're not sure how it got spread out that far, but they had 250 votes from different people. My parents were one of them, so I do know how that one happened. But, you know, they said, please share this with contacts and vote on your logo. And so this was also very motivating for the students to have people from outside voting, and it brought in more awareness of what these students were doing. And then in the end, we asked the parents, after watching the finale and the different campaign output, to then make a pledge, and they had to make a pledge of how they would work to save water. Okay, so also here, we're just starting to dig into all of the data we have. We have student surveys, we have student interviews, we have teacher reflection, we have student output, we have recordings, so many hours of recordings, online recordings of the video conferences, and of course the AI platform transcripts, which are over 700 pages. And we're not sure how we're going to deal with that just yet, but we're starting. The survey found that overall the students found AI useful as a tool, but they did use traditional tools when they felt like they needed to. They also found, so they would go to an atlas if they felt like that was more useful for them. They would go to Google. They discovered that Google wasn't quite as useful as they thought, but they were also very smart, because when AI wouldn't speak to them in English, they would go to Google Translate and then copy it over, which you'll see in a minute. They said that it was most useful for helping them prepare to use English. So their focus was on, even though it could be used for other things, it was on helping them prepare for the different aspects for the mystery game, the campaign output, which had to be in English. And of course, parents were very excited about the AI, and they felt like it had helped the students improve their English and their digital skills. And we also have emergent digital and intercultural awareness. We have lots of examples of that, which I didn't bring in, but I can explain. So here you have a couple of videos. The students are elaborating the questions for the mystery game. Students are supposed to be working in pairs or trios with the ChatGPT platform. The teachers told them to provide prompts to get smart yes/no questions that will help them to guess the country of their partners. Let's see if this is working.
Of course, yes. Ready, steady, go. Vale, se lo envío. Okay. Vale, pero solo Middle one up here. A ver, who are you? Vale, quita la mesa y ponte ahí. Do you remember the questions? Hello, forward to it. Espera, le voy a poner. I'm fine. No, le voy a poner. Are you good? No, I'm good. And you? Vale. I am good. And you? Espera, hay que poner eso. No, porque si no, pues...
Okay, so you can see in this first one that they're negotiating how they're reading what it's saying to them, and then they're negotiating, and they're actually responding in a way to, okay, they asked me how I am, so, okay, I'm going to answer it back. I'm good, and you? So you can see that. And then it took them a long time, approximately 10 minutes in, before they were actually able to give a prompt that was about the mystery class, okay? So
Our two questions
Hello again. Are lying.
written ahí, there's no. There are written.
¿Cómo puedo? Ala, soy muy servicial. ¿Cómo puedo ayudarte hoy?
Good English.
Déjate, a mí también me dejas. Please, we are playing the mystery.
Can you tell me please what do we write?
The mystery style.
okay, so what we see here is that they know, and they say, es muy servil, eh? So they're like, how, it's so courteous. Is this normal? So they notice these things. They notice these sort of this social interaction that the AI platform had been trained to do. So I've got just a few more minutes. I can answer questions about that in a minute, but I have lots and lots of more data that shows that there are lots of negotiation of what to type in, which I didn't bring in because I didn't think we had time. But I wanted to talk about what are some of the pedagogical implications. And if you're wondering, this is augmented reality, not virtual reality. This is the use of augmented reality in a classroom, which is also quite fascinating. But what are some of the pedagogical implications of everything we've seen? I think that there are some transversal features, many of which are also not only here in what we're seeing, not only what has just been presented, but I'm also seeing, I was looking at some of the work of the people that are here. And I think this is going to be emerging throughout the workshop. Gamified elements can have a significant impact on learning, including language acquisition, but perhaps not as significant in long-term results, okay? So we need to do some more research into that. But however, this is only going to be effective if the training objectives correspond to the skills put into practice during gameplay, right? Expectation management. What we're doing is, it's not just about putting the kids there to have fun. Okay, and this is going back to the design of the tasks, thinking about, you got to think first what you want them to do, what you need them to do, what they need to learn. It's not just about them having fun, because they want to learn, and they have to also believe that that what they're using is actually going to help them. And because if they think, we're just going to play, then they're probably not going to learn. Engagement with digital content, avatars, other learners online, is motivating for learners. We've seen that. Intuitive, we know that, but there is research that shows that as well. And it does promote language production if done in the right way. We've seen lots of examples now of how the students, when they're left alone, as you said, when the teacher's disengaged, when the teacher has to leave them alone, they have to work at it, and they're going to do it. It goes beyond just gadgets in the classroom. It has to be meaningful, and again, I think that that's been brought out the whole time. And it should be rooted in learners' real-life digital practices, okay? Another key point is the use of technology must be coherently integrated into the lesson design. We don't design something because we like the technology. We find the technology that fits the lesson design that we need, and then it has to be aligned with learning objectives. And teacher preparation is fundamental. There's a gap between language teachers' candidates' preparation and the advances in technology and the predictions that I mentioned earlier. Things are happening so fast. Sometimes there's a lot of reactions to it. Oh, I got to learn everything, or I just don't want to have anything to do with it. There's so many different visceral reactions to these technologies. But if we integrate this into our preparation, then we're not going to be so scared of it. I started working in 2007 with Second Life, and my first experiences with that, I was terrified as an avatar. Okay, I did not know what I was doing. And Second Life has died in a way, and nobody uses it anymore. But it helped prepare me for what I'm doing now with the headsets, right? So in my own trajectory, I've seen how being exposed to the vanguard, even if it's something that's eventually going to drop by the wayside, they all do anyway. So being prepared to use it you're going to be able to adapt it. But of course, this requires investment and support in teacher education, right? So this is more to policymakers, which I don't know if there are any here, but hopefully this word will get out that without this support, we're not going to go anywhere. So what is our role? This is a picture of me with my teachers, students. We're doing an online conference and presenting project-based VR, VE, virtual exchange projects, their ideas. I think that we need to integrate technology into language teaching from 3 perspectives: technology, language use, and life. And always thinking about what is the oral output, what is the listening, what is the communication that's taking place. It's not just about learning grammar, as she pointed out here. It's not so much about the PPP as where's the communication taking place, real communication. So if we think about technology, first of all, there's a lot of technology for education already out there, loads, and teachers are using it. So, but apart from the 2 cases that I think we're going to be seeing tomorrow, most of these have not been designed by teachers. They've been designed by engineers, by technology engineers whose experience in education goes back to what I said, that everybody thinks they're an expert in education because they had schooling at some time in their lives, right? But they don't necessarily understand the paradigms of the way we're trying to teach. So you have a lot of the technology is teacher fronted, and it's about drill and kill or about testing, right? But that doesn't mean that these are not good tools, and kids like them. We can't put them down. Kids do like them, but maybe we need to think about how we could also, once we're using them, use them different ways. This is an example from a student. I can't read this. If you read Chinese, good for you. I was supervising Chinese teacher, soon-to-be teacher, and so we were trying to think of new ways to use Kahoot because she was bored with it. And she said, "Well, what about if they have to put these words into a sentence?" And I said, "Okay, but then what? And what do you do after I've done that?" I said, "Well, how about the sentence that you arrange sentences that the students then have to use to go back into groups and create a play or a dialogue or something like that." So we need to think creative about the tools that we have, right? Not that they're bad tools, but maybe think about how can I push it further to get the students to actually communicate with it. Language use. We have loads and loads of tools out there that we're using to communicate every day. Now, we can't bring them all into the classroom, and there is a problem right now about cell phones. Should they be in the school? Should they not be in the school? So we're in this position where what's going to happen? But if we look at some of the technologies that we're using already, and the students are already using, can we bring these some way into our own classes? Maybe giving students a mission as a pre-task. So here you have the students, they have to write the beginning of a story. So they have to choose from 2 of these emojis, okay? Face like this, a skateboard, a volcano, a scooter, a carrot, and an elephant, okay? Very random emojis, but probably could inspire some really interesting stories, which maybe they even use AI to start their stories. Who knows? So you can integrate a lot of different technologies into the design. Of course, you've got to think it out. You've got to provide the scaffolding for it. And finally, I think we need to think about life. Not just about how we use it now, but how we're going to be using it in the future. We all remember in the pandemic, teachers got pushed into using technology. For those of us who had been using virtual exchange for many, many years, and I look at Kara here as well, it wasn't a transition. We're just like, well, yeah, of course, this is what you got to do, right? And we were, in a way, we were prepared for it because we saw it coming. We were saying inevitably, this is where we're going to be. And so, students up till then they were learning to make presentations in person, which is important. This is what I'm doing right now. But they also are going to have to eventually make presentations online. So are we also getting them to practice that? Are they learning to make presentations online, which probably they'll do more than they'll do in person, right? So we need to start thinking ahead. How are they going to need these? And even if it seems far-fetched now, as soon as the price of this technology goes down and it's more available, it's going to be here, and they're going to have to use it. I can still, oh yes, I'm old enough. I can remember before cell phones were ubiquitous. I remember seeing the first mobile phone, and it was a huge box, okay? It was like you had to wind it up. Yes, I'm that old, okay? Everybody's, the young face is like, what? Okay. My son, when he found out that internet didn't exist when I grew up, he's like, oh, what? Right? But now it's ubiquitous. And these other things that are coming along, we got to think about it because they're going to become ubiquitous as well. So if we're already preparing our students, like I said, the first time I went into Second Life, I was terrified. And here I had this avatar, and I thought I was just so cool. And I was taken to a club, dancing club in Second Life. And another avatar looked at me and said, Melinda, you're in my space. And I panicked. So I just clicked off, right? And I thought that was it. But it turns out that my avatar in Second Life was just like this, okay? It went into default mode of standing in the middle of a disco, right? Virtual disco with its head slumped over, like I was drunk or something. So my avatar was drunk, I guess. I don't know. But these are competences that we're going to have to get used to. We're going to have to get used to potentially sitting in a conference room with holograms. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it's coming. It's coming. It's already there. Who would have thought we would have drone taxis 10 years ago? We've got drone taxis now, right? So these are things that as teachers, we need to be thinking ahead and thinking about, I believe that we need to be preparing for this, our students for this. I bring in these VR into my classrooms, and my students are like, oh, we don't need this. And I'm like, yeah, you do. You do. Because you won't use it now because it's too expensive. Yes, it's way too expensive. But it won't be always. And you'll be prepared for it. And so even once you feel more comfortable with it, you'll use the cheaper versions of VR Frame. So I've got students who are using VR Frame now. That's the cheaper version. Okay. You don't need headsets. So there's so many different possibilities that I believe that we need to be thinking about. And here are the references, and I'm going to say promises kept. Yes, I think so. I think so. So far. But there's still a lot of work to do. And I think people like yourselves who are here are the future, and you'll be the ones who are doing it. So I hope that you've come away with some ideas. And I'm going to try to say this in Galician, gracias. Huh? Is that right? Yes? So thank you very much. Okay, so we still have time for questions. I was trying to not no. Just kidding.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Melinda. Are there any questions? Yes?
Inspiring presentation, combining different technologies, which is something that we were very interested in. Just it was a pleasure actually to see virtual reality and AI. Excuse me, thank you very much. And combining that also with primary education, which, you know, what I find is most people will be interested in specialist scholars in higher education, even sometimes secondary education, because they use smartphones and so on. But you don't find research, not that easy just to find, especially about AI and so on, primary education. And I thought it was just very, very, very thought-provoking, very inspiring. I have two questions for you. I never like to take out the people's time, obviously, if they want. First one is, since you were using, and we had a project, we'll talk about that if we have time after, where we talk about augmented reality. And what about their previous, like children's previous experience with virtual reality and also with artificial intelligence? Because sometimes they're influenced, obviously, by their parents, by their teachers, attitudes that they have. So what we found is that most of them are familiar, for example, with virtual reality, augmented reality, because they play video games, as you said. We didn't have that when we were, I didn't have that, of course. But I'm always surprised about that, because sometimes they have even a negative attitude. And it's like, kind of like, we don't want to do that. Just because they have been told, because it's like, that's the way they learn from other, from teachers and so on. So I don't know, since you were working with, also with, I guess, like with teachers, what about their previous experience and training in virtual reality and augmented reality, or in that case with artificial intelligence, right? Are there any regulations about that? Because you were working with, I think in Catalonia, that was Sant Jordi, and I'm familiar with that because I usually we will go to the Autonomous University. Is there any regulations about that? So thank you.
It's a lot of questions. Okay. I'm not sure if you're talking about experience from the students with VR or the teachers.
Both of them.
Both. In our case, we only had like one student who had used headsets, and it was for playing, right? We did not have any reticence from the school, from the parents, or from the students, although a couple of them got dizzy, and that's a problem, okay? This is why it was limited to 20 minutes. We're skirting the level, the age, but we looked at it, and it's recommended that you don't have students under 13, but it's not a mandate, okay? So but we had to get permission from the parents first, okay? Do my student teachers have experience with VR? Very few. I was surprised. It's maybe out of 25, maybe 2 or 3. And you've got all range. You've got students who are like, oh yeah, let's do this. And you got students like, don't want to know anything about it. So we don't force them because we give them the option of the low immersion on screen. So they can design things with that. But once they're in it and they experience it, they say, oh yeah, I can see how this would really motivate students. So I do think experience has a lot to do with it. These headsets are not made for little kids. You can see here they're wearing a hoodie. There's a reason for this. It's too big for them, so that helps them hold it on, okay? And the girls would put their hair up in ponytails and hold it on with the ponytails. So it's not for kids yet, but I think it will be. And, it's the mixed reality now is the next thing, and it's going to help with dizziness. Okay, it's still very expensive. The other question you had?
Regulations, if there are any, you said before, you answered that before, so that's fine. Yeah, I was interested, especially with primary education. That was just very inspiring.
And with the AI, none of the students in this class even knew what AI was. We had to do an entire class on defining what is artificial intelligence. And we have a very nice clip. I don't have it, but we have a student who's angry because he didn't give it the answer he wanted. He said, this artificial intelligence, it's not so intelligent after all. Okay, so I'm not totally impressed with it either. So,
thank you.
Any more comments, suggestions? Well, as you very well mentioned, I had a question, which is a follow-up of what you were talking about now in AI. These students were not trained just to design prompts, yeah? Mm-hmm. So you had to dedicate a full session, 2 sessions.
2 sessions,
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about how you train them in terms of prompt design, or even the potential ethical implications of using AI? I don't know if you...
Well, the platform itself, let's talk about the ethical first. The platform itself was designed with child protection laws in place. So it was designed where they could not use curse words. They could not, there were certain references could not be included. And it was on a special platform. Mm-hmm. So the S.A. Manuel designed it, so the only people people who had access to it, of course, were the teachers and the researchers and the students. So we very carefully followed the COPPD, I think is the term for the child data protection laws. So we did follow that. As I said, we discovered that they were quick on recognizing that it would answer them back in Catalan or Spanish, and so we had to retrain it to not answer, not accept that. Because their first prompts, they were doing it in Catalan and Spanish, okay? So there was a whole lesson that we had not planned in the initial lessons that we had to, where it is, how do you ask smart questions? And one of the students, so here's where, I mean, we're talking digital competences at 0 level here. Student went in and said, because the teacher had written how to ask smart questions, typed into ChatGPT, how to ask smart questions, right? And gets back all this information that's irrelevant, right? This is why you saw in the first video, it's 50 seconds in and then 10 minutes later, okay? So it took a long time. But eventually, by the 5th session they were using it, they were better aimed prompts, and so it is a competence I think that they're going to have to develop. I can't say they developed it 100% here. No, definitely not. But they improved in their prompts.
I'm also amazed by the fact in the first video in VR activity, I guess it was a supermarket. Mm-hmm. They were not get carried away with such.
Oh yes, they did. Oh yes, they did.
But they don't change into Spanish or Catalan. No. I'm amazed by that.
Yeah, the first session was chaos. Okay, just as soon as, because you cannot control the avatar. You can bring the avatars and freeze them, but if you unfreeze them, they're like choo, 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 okay, and then you're like, where you go. And it's hard for the teacher who's in the computer to even know who's talking to them. So it could be total chaos, but we kept it small groups. And after the first session, when they started getting the teacher saying, you have to behave. This is where you're getting the behave. How do we behave? So after the first session, there was a class on how do we behave in the VR sessions. We talked about it before, but then we had to reiterate and go back over. But yes, they really forced themselves because they thought that the avatar teachers did not speak Spanish or Catalan.
Okay.
So
that was the trick in a way.
Exactly. They were not aware that the others could understand what they were saying. And in some cases, they didn't. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for such an engaging presentation as well. We're going to have a coffee break now, a minute coffee break. There's complimentary coffee now. Is it in the first floor? Am I wrong? First floor. So you go down to the ground floor and go upstairs to the first floor, and there's free coffee. Okay? We'll see you again at 12 o'clock. Thank you.